who's a Baltimore youth leader coming out of Benjamin Franklin High School in the Curtis Bay neighborhood of Baltimore, won the Goldman Environmental Prize. She is one of 6 winners this year. This is a very prestigious global prize for environmental activists, and it was because of her work, which started as a high school student to stop the Energy Answers trash incinerator in her neighborhood, just less than a mile from her high school. And now that community is pushing beyond that win against the incinerator and pushing for the land to be returned to the community so they can build a community-owned solar farm. So congratulations, Destiny. We're really proud of you. And next we're going to bring on our final guest, Joshua Harris. He's also a Baltimore resident and is running for mayor in Baltimore on the Green Party ticket. We are in our primary process right now, so Joshua won't be the official candidate until after the nomination process has concluded on May 1st. We hope that he's our official candidate on May 1st.
What was that tweet you put out about voting in the primary?
Oh. It was something to the effect that unless you're a registered Green voter in the city, that it's sad that your choices are only one of the 2 money-dominated parties. But welcome, Joshua.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's start with, why don't you tell us about your background and, what kind of work you've been doing in Baltimore since you've been here, and then we'll get into what kind of changes you hope to see.
Well, thank you. So I am, I've done a lot of work, I guess. You stay busy. I've done a lot of different things. I'm a former legislator of aid for Delegate Charleston North Annapolis, where actually last legislative session we worked to amend the wiretap rules to make body camera legislation possible in the state of Maryland. And so that was exciting to see and get that pushed through a victory for transparency on both ends of the community as well as the police. I also currently work for an international nonprofit that provides mentorship and scholarship to young African American boys and men, and so our international headquarters is here in Baltimore, and we do a lot of work. We have a go to high school, go to college program. We partners with Big Brother Big Sister, and in that role I'm actually our liaison to Capitol Hill, where I work with 8 members of Congress as well on policy issues that align with our mission and vision. I co-founded my own nonprofit a few years ago called Hollins Creative Placemakers. And we focus on creating urban revitalization and urban renewal using arts as a catalyst while minimizing cultural displacement. So basically understanding gentrification and how we counter that through creating an environment of belonging versus disbelonging. I belong here, you belong here. This is our neighborhood, our community, our city, and we're in this together, and we have much more in common than we have different. And so that has been a tremendous experience, doing all sorts of events and community gatherings and community organizing. It's been a really great experience seeing that grow over the past few years, and so I've done a lot of different work. I've worked for Black and Brown People Vote on the national level, which is an organization that focuses on voter registration, but most importantly voter education and making sure that people are aware of not just the issues, but where to get the information from and how do you make sure that you are civically engaged to really understand the process and what's happening. I've worked with the Dream Defenders down in Florida when they organized around Trayvon Martin, occupied the governor's office to demand the arrest of George Zimmerman after the murder of Trayvon Martin back in 2012 now. No, I was not part of the occupation, but I've worked with them and helped to spread awareness on the issues that they've been pushing over the past few years here. So I've done a lot of different stuff. I've got quite the gambit of exposure and I guess experience.
Yeah, and so maybe you can tell our listeners how you were you surprised when the uprising happened, or did you kind of have a sense that something like that was coming in Baltimore?
I can't say that I was surprised. I think that it's only a matter of time before things really come to a head. And a lot of people will say, oh, Freddie Gray. There's been hundreds of Freddie Grays in Baltimore City. And understanding it wasn't just about one individual person. It was about conditions that have been put in place and allowed to remain for decades. And it was really disheartening that the day after everything happened, when you go over to Pennsylvania North Avenue, when you walk down the street, you couldn't tell the difference between what was new and what was from 1968. And so understanding that people live in those conditions every single day. And I believe that the cause of it, of course, was the juxtaposition of massive amounts of wealth up against massive amounts of poverty, and understanding there are communities and people who have been neglected, ignored, and forgotten and literally pushed and isolated into corners in certain neighborhoods in the city, and it's only a matter of time before that just comes to a bubble. And that's what we saw last spring. And unfortunately, there still hasn't been anything done to substantively address the root cause of last spring, what we saw in the uprising. And so that is going to require leadership that is truly committed to people first, I believe.
Did you have a question? Well, I just was going to say that. So, what inspired you to run for mayor in Baltimore this year, this season?
A lot of the work that I was doing, I guess, was on the ground. It put me in positions to have relationships with some of the elected leadership, and so I would use that as opportunity to have conversations with them and ask them about great things that were being done in other cities and that we can do here to begin to implement and begin to create some real sustainable change in the communities and the neighborhoods of Baltimore City. And unfortunately, I found that there was leadership that were more concerned with their next election rather than the next generation and creating real equal opportunity for change and success. And so that was disheartening, but I also saw it as an opportunity to step up to the plate and be the leadership that was truly committed to investing in people first. And so I decided to do it, and it was actually I officially decided a few months before everything happened in April, and then that happened, and it was like, wow, there really is a need for someone to care, not just when something happens, but before something happens, and have leadership that's going to be proactive rather than reactive.
I love that expression, to care, that they were caring more about the next election than the next generation, and we need to flip that around, right?
So you've had a really interesting primary season. You started out Democrat, you switched to Green. You can explain that if you like. And you've gotten some really good attention. The City Paper gave you a massive thumbs up, the largest thumbs up of any of the almost 28, 29 candidates that are running. So you definitely got their attention, and you did well at a City College debate where they gave you won the straw poll after the debate was over, and you seem to be really widely liked. That's really interesting. I mean, this is an unusual time with the uprising. Next year will be 50 years in a row of Democrat Party mayors, 50 years in a row of one-party rule. And so why do you see that you're getting traction even in this Democrat, that's usually considered a Democrat primary season? Why is that happening?
I think that after last spring, I think that we understand it's the conditions that led to the uprising, but I also believe that not just here in Baltimore, but all around the country, more people are paying attention than ever before. They're watching because they are aware that something is wrong and something isn't being done right. And because they're paying attention, they're asking questions, and then they're asking the follow-up questions. And so I think that the uprising is not over. I think that it will be something that will carry over and take many facets of a movement. I think that organizing and protesting is one component of it. I think that another large component of it is building political power that's committed to the people. And I think that people want to see that. And so I think I can't say I have gotten some traction, and I think it's just because I'm saying what people know and what they have seen for the last 30 and 40 years in the city, and what they have seen not be addressed. And I'm bringing light to these issues when other candidates or other individuals may tap dance around it or just ignore it completely. I'm not. People have to be aware of these issues and be educated on what's happening or what's not happening so that we can begin to see real change in the city. And I also think that for me, I did start as a Democrat, and there were several things that led to me switching, understanding, one, that Baltimore City has been Democratic for 60-something years now. However, the majority of its policies have been what many would say are Republican in nature. The way that we favor major corporations at the expense of our neighborhoods and our people, these are not democratic or a democracy in that matter. And so the only thing that's been democratic about it has been the title. And so the Green Party is a party that values social justice, racial justice, environmental justice, as well as economic justice and grassroots democracy, bringing more people into the process. And that is exciting. That's what we need. And I believe that it's a party that's more fitting with my values, my beliefs. And I also believe that we need leadership, not just here, although we'll focus on Baltimore, but around the country, that is willing to stand up for what's right and go against the grain, regardless of what's popular or what the status quo is. And we need leadership that's going to be committed to people, even if it's not the cool or popular thing to do, because it's what's right. It's what's right for the people, and it's what's needed to be done. And you have to have leadership that's going to have the integrity to do that, not just stand for, oh, well, this is what I have to do to win an election, or this is what I'm going to have to do to get this endorsement. And so having leadership that's truly committed to that is what I'm aspiring to be. So.
And I think one of those issues that you've been involved in and has become kind of a hot topic here, but I think you're the one that's talking about it the most in the most honest way, is the subject of the TIFs, of the tax incremental financing that's going on. And in particular, the community of Poe homes, which I think is not getting enough attention for the way that it has been excluded from this process. Can you talk a little bit about what's going on in Baltimore with the TIFs?
Well, yes, absolutely. The tax incremental financing policies of Baltimore City is a huge problem. It has not been substantively used to address the plethora of unequal distribution of capital, which is at the root, again, I believe, of what we saw last spring. Knowing that, again, here everyone's talking about TIFs now because Kevin Plank and Under Armour are asking for a $500 million TIF for a piece of land that is just a large park for all intents and purposes. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city in West Baltimore, the University of Maryland Biopark was just given an $18 million TIF, or $17.5 to be exact, million dollar TIF, while just one block away, some of the highest concentrations of poverty in the city exist there, and they've done nothing to address that despite making promises for more than 14 years to do so. I believe that these are examples of the economic injustice that perpetuates so many of the issues we see in the communities here in Baltimore City. Knowing that there's a direct connection to economic injustice, and when an African American male is killed in his neighborhood either by his peer or by the police, understanding that he had to live in a community that was void of resources, a community that was undervalued or devalued, or he had to attend a school that didn't have heat in many places in the wintertime, and understanding that it was most likely because the city or the state decided to give millions of dollars to an institution or an organization that did not need it at the expense of his neighborhood or his school, and understanding how that directly connects to. And I know it's not the injustice that gets people up in arms and ready to protest, but it should be, because it's at the root cause, particularly understanding this is a capitalist nation. And so these issues are driven by capital and distribution of it. And so we need leadership who's going to come in and be willing to address the issues and redistribute that capital to invest in all of Baltimore, and make sure that we're breaking up some of the disparities and isolated poverty that we've continued to see in the city. So tax incremental financing is a huge issue that definitely needs to be totally revamped in how we do it as a city.
These are big, transformative concepts you're putting forward. Let's go down a little bit to more specific areas. You talk about transforming how capital is distributed. Give me some examples of policies that you would be advocating for that would be part of that kind of change.
Well, all too often we hear in Baltimore City that the communities and the neighborhoods don't feel like they're involved in the process. They don't know what's happening until after it's done. They don't have a say in what developments happen in their community or where the money goes in the neighborhood. And so they need to be brought into the process. And so one of the things that we're definitely looking at including is participatory budgeting and making sure that there's a direct hands-on approach to the neighborhoods being involved, or first having capital and then being involved and making sure how that is used. And so knowing that in Baltimore City we have 14 councilmatic districts, what would it look like if each district had their own budget to go towards development in their own councilmatic district and was working with the coalition of the neighborhoods in that district to really develop cohesively, evenly across the city? What differences could we see there? And it wasn't just a heavy downtown district that got all of the capital and all of the money to do investment, anything to touch the water. How differently can we change the narrative of the future of Baltimore City for our young people, for the opportunities for business expansion, business growth, the opportunity for equal growth in all of our neighborhoods is something that's very exciting.
Well, can I
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, what would that look like in Poe Homes? I mean, literally, their unreasonable demands that were not met was that they have jobs from this new project that's going forward, that they have training so people in their community that has a high unemployment rate can take these jobs, so they can have a recreation center for the children that live there. I mean, this is a company, a corporation, BlackRock, which is one of the wealthiest, real estate corporations in the world, that's behind this, and they were asking for just very basic things. If they had that capital, control over that capital, they could create job training centers. They could create the recreation centers that they're asking for. They wouldn't have to beg for them.
Before you respond to that, let's get more into participatory budgeting, because in addition to being, very capital money's given to the local community to control, they decide where it gets spent. So it's not just advising the government, it's actually making the decision. That's a tremendous shift in power, from giving power to a council member who took a lot of money from developers to the community itself making decisions. That's a philosophical massive change. And so I think that kind of concept of participatory governance, or transferring power actually to people and communities, does that kind of run through your thinking?
Absolutely. We are looking to transform, we're looking to make a transformational change and understand that we're reshaping the culture and how things are done. And so this is all about giving power back to people where it's supposed to be, and making sure that people are included in the process and have a say, because that's what it is. It shouldn't be that one person who gets written checks is in control of what happens, who gets campaign contributions, determines what happens to all of the finances and all of the capital in the city. We really have to break up that, and that's part of bringing or removing the big money away from politics. And the way to do that is to shift it away from big money to big people power. And so we know that the only thing that trumps money power is people power, and so we have to give people power. And so that is definitely a staple of my campaign all the way through. And so looking at things, when we talk about what that would look like in Poe Homes, for instance, the company, the University of Maryland Biopark, its developer, works for Science and Technology, who's owned by Blackstone Corporation, who's one of the world's wealthiest corporations. We're given $18 million of my tax dollars, your tax dollars. Anyone who has a job in Baltimore City, they were given our money. And so understanding that one block away are these high concentrations of poverty, the community requested that a recreation center be renovated and redone that's 2 blocks away from the project. They also requested that they get to select co-constructor of the project, because the biopark has a history of hiring developers that don't hire people of color. Knowing that the previous building, the Proton Center, was built by a developer that has lawsuits on the book for racial discrimination and such, they want to ensure that local hiring goals are met as well as minority hiring goals. And then the last request was the endowment of a training academy that would train citizens, targeting ex-offenders and chronically unemployed, to train them in construction, green jobs, and hospitality. Knowing that these are jobs that exist right now in the city, knowing that these are jobs that we usually send to Baltimore County, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and West Virginia, that we want to make sure that they're going to the citizens right here in Baltimore City, so we can begin to work towards raising the median family household income in the city, which is going to again get to addressing those root causes of poverty, which were the stirring point for what we saw last spring.
I mean, one of the challenges in a city like any city in the country, but also in a city like Baltimore, is that money. You don't have enough to fulfill the needs of the city. And, we will go into debt for some of these TIFs. We'll put a bond out and go into debt, but and the taxpayers end up paying that debt off. I mean, so how do you deal with that? How do you you can't just go begging the federal government or the state that they're cutting back. So where's Baltimore get the money to make this happen? How's it going to rearrange its finances so it can happen?
Well, that's actually a really great question, and I don't know that people on the local level recognize the direct connection or the need for us in the city to also go to war with Wall Street, just like we're talking about on the national level. The city does take out these huge municipal bonds, and actually the one that most recently I can think of, the $107 million TIF that we gave to the Beatty Group to build Exelon Energy's new building downtown, $107 million. We went up to Wall Street, we took out a municipal bond to cover it, we came back, we give the money to the developer, then the developer goes up to Wall Street and he purchased $42 million of the bonds for that. And we as a city are paying 19% interest on that. 19% interest. And so what it looks like for us to go to Wall Street and say, hey, we're not going to deal with these astronomically high interest rates anymore. We're not going to go out of town to get our money. We're going to leverage the capital that we have right here in the city, and we're going to use it to our advantage. Knowing that Baltimore City has a $3 billion operating budget, what would it look like if we leveraged that and we created our own bank? If we had a Baltimore City bank and we were essentially banking for Baltimore, what would it look like to not have to go and take out a loan from Wall Street and pay 19% interest because we've leveraged the public banking is what we're looking at doing. If we were able to leverage the capital that we have here in the city to be able to not just create more wealth, but we can give out small business loans, we can give out home loans, knowing that in Baltimore City you can get a vacant house for anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000, and you can renovate it and have a brand new home for about $50,000 to $60,000. But no traditional bank will give you a loan for $50,000 to $60,000 because they don't want to deal with the hassle of it. They would much rather give it to a major developer for millions of dollars than a small person for $50,000 to $60,000. We could take Baltimore City Bank and give out loans to people that otherwise wouldn't have access to them. We can use it to give out microfinancing loans to small businesses, and we're really looking at boosting our local economy and keeping the dollars here in Baltimore City. And because we're not driven by profit as a bank, we're just leveraging what we already have, we can have much lower interest rates than a traditional bank. So that's also something that we haven't officially rolled out, but there's definitely part of the platform and something that I believe could do wonders to addressing poverty and creating more real long-term wealth in the city.
Yeah, I mean, it's a $3 billion budget, operating budget. That's a ton of money. And if you could somehow put that into a Baltimore City bank, not only would you not be taking out those kinds of expensive loans from Wall Street and paying those big fees, I mean, 19% interest on $100 million, that's a lot of money. I mean, that could break Baltimore, that's what that could do. But we have a $90 million rainy day fund that we just put in a big Wall Street bank and let it sit there, and they get the profit from it. We get a little interest, and so just that $90 million. What a place to start! If you can leverage that 10 times what it's worth, even that little bit of rainy day fund could become an engine for change. And there's so many needs in Baltimore that public banking could be a really cutting edge idea. So I'm glad you're considering that. And how about on the energy front? You mentioned that the last TIF, the last big bond that we put out was for our Exelon Energy. What can we do to really take control of our own sources of energy in Baltimore?
Well, I think it's extremely important that we also recognize and that people understand that energy is huge. We're looking at how do we protect the environment and make sure that our future generations have a planet and have a place to call home. And we have to begin to move towards sustainable, clean energy. And so we've seen places like California who are going to create 300,000 jobs by moving towards clean energy. What could we do here in Baltimore? We have the Maryland Renewable Portfolio Standards, which requires energy suppliers to meet a certain percentage of clean energy by the year 2022, which we haven't taken steps in that direction yet. What would it look like if we were to take the same steps as California and we move towards clean energy? Because if we actually meet the requirement by the year 2022, we'll reduce our carbon footprint by 11 million metric tons, which is the equivalent of taking 2.5 million cars off the road. And that's just by moving towards clean energy and using solar power, wind power, and things of that sort. How many thousands upon thousands of jobs can we create? And we could become the clean energy manufacturing and production hub for the entire eastern seaboard, let alone just Baltimore. And we would bring industry to the city, which this is a blue-collar city historically. You had the steel industry, you had the garment industry, so many different, the shipping industry. And when those industries left, we had generations of workers without work. And so what it looked like to put our city back to work as green-collar, a green-collar city. And how many thousands of jobs can we create doing that? How can we reduce our carbon footprint? How can we train and ingrain into our curriculums to make sure that our young people are prepared for the industry that we're bringing here so they can go to work immediately upon completion of 12th grade should they choose not to go to college, and understanding what that can do to creating living wage job opportunities. I actually just flew to Masdar in October, which Masdar is in the United Arab Emirates, and it's the world's first sustainably green city built from the ground up. And it's about the size of, I guess, half of downtown Baltimore, maybe the full size of downtown Baltimore, but it's entirely powered by solar and wind energy. And they use geothermal technologies for heating and temperature control, and it's just amazing because they don't have large solar panels that sit on the roofs. The solar is built into the design and the infrastructure of the buildings, and so every window is solar. It has solar wiring running through it, and it's bringing in energy to power the building. And how can we do that knowing that we have 40,000 vacants that need to be renovated and brought to market? What if they were energy efficient? How many thousands of jobs can we create to do that? For how many years for that work? And it'll be going to people here in the city. So that's definitely a staple of something that I think could create tremendous change, combined with PACE legislation and all property assessed clean energy and so many other things. We can do great work here in Baltimore City.
Yeah, there's so much potential here. I mean, we have a lot of unused resources. We have a lot of talent that isn't being able to be expressed, and I think that it's exciting to have you in this race and to have you bring this vision and this passion and commitment to the people, because we really could transform Baltimore. I mean, we really have the power to do that.
I think we should say that, Margaret is a U.S. Senate candidate for the Green Party as well, and Josh is obviously a mayoral candidate, one of our mayoral candidates, which will decide if you're the nominee May 1st, right, is the finale of that. And so I just to kind of disclaimer that this is a discussion among colleagues, really. So far when you talked about energy, participatory budgeting, public banks, I'm beginning to see kind of a web of changes that really give power to people. I mean, the energy issue, that brings power down to the individual home or the individual community. And I could see a participatory budgeting process where the community votes. We want a solar array in our community to give us free energy. So I could see a community taking power from that, making the choice to create their own energy and reduce their own bills and transform their own community. You talk about public banking, transparent banking. The public, it's democratically controlled with the purpose of serving Baltimore rather than serving the profit of Wall Street. Again, so let's look at a couple other, another couple other issues. We'll take longer if we need to because we've been here for a while. Why not? Two other issues I want to talk about: food and housing. How can we do the same kind of concepts of putting power down to the community for the individual homeowners, individual families? How do we, on food and housing, how do we give community control?
There is definitely a theme of building power in my campaign for people. I'm progressive who believes in the triple bottom line: people, planet, profit, and in that order. All too often, profit is usually the first one, and so we want to change that and make sure that people and planet are coming first as we look to create change and justice. We're not fighting for power or privilege. We're fighting for justice, and that's what this is about. And so when we talk about food, it's huge issue in Baltimore City in particularly, knowing that 3/4 of the city are food deserts. They don't have access to fresh fruits and produces. And how do we address that? And so there's ways to look at, in 2012, Johns Hopkins did a study, which isn't many people's favorite institution, but this study actually yielded some great results. And they talked about the ability to establish local food distribution centers inside neighborhoods that have been neglected or that are food deserts. And they would partner with local farms, and then they would partner with local corner stores and bodegas to provide access to the fresh fruits and produce, because it's about access. And right now there's no access or very limited access in 3/4 of the city. And so to be able to do that, and also looking into it, one of my plans is to include the Arabers who have historically provided access to fresh fruits and vegetables in Baltimore City. They have horse-drawn carriages that distribute fruits and vegetables to many of the neighborhoods that don't have supermarkets and grocery stores. They've done this for nearly 100 years now. I think longer they've been around. And so having them partner, which of course again is creating jobs, you're providing access to it, which is of course addressing issues of health disparities. We know that 69% of chronic illnesses are directly related to our diet. And so we know that if we change our diets, we can drastically reduce cancer, diabetes, heart disease, and so many other chronic illnesses that plague communities of poverty, quite frankly, and it begins with access. So that's definitely a staple. We want to provide access while simultaneously creating jobs and addressing issues of health. And the other question you asked about was housing. Baltimore City is 40,000 vacants effectively. We think that there's probably more than that. Knowing that the housing is an opportunity to bring new houses to market, but it's also an opportunity to put people to work. And that is directly related to crime, I believe. Because what do we know about crime in Baltimore City is that 75% of felony crimes are committed by individuals who've had prior interaction with the law or are repeat offenders. So we want to have an immediate impact on crime reduction. We have to focus on preventing offenders from reoffending. And so an individual's employment drastically reduces their propensity to return to crime. We have to begin to break the cycle of you don't have a job, so you're in the streets, you get locked up and go to jail, you get out, you can't get a job now, so you go back to the streets and you go back to jail. We have to break that cycle and focus on providing employment opportunities for our returning citizens. And I believe that that will come through providing them the skills and training them to do the work of rehabbing our houses, to do the work of solar energy and manufacturing, to be involved in these green tech incubators that are in my platform to help revitalize communities and teach people the technologies and begin to train them to do the houses, and to do houses that are energy efficient, I think is a huge component. Also leveraging things like I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank. Leveraging things like community land trust, which are huge, to help people to understand, using community land trust to stabilize housing markets, basically understanding that housing is valued in two different ways, needs-based versus market-based. And so the market is determined by something that someone decides is cool or valuable, whereas needs-based, all of our homes provide the exact same thing for us. And so being able to stabilize the housing market and prices by using community land trust, looking at things like rent ceilings, so that we don't have astronomical rent rates for people who are trying to stay within the city or in certain communities. New York had some great strides and success with that in the early 90s, but then they let the legislation get amended 3 years later, and it totally wiped out all the work that they did. And so being able to put things like that in place to protect housing for people and understand that housing is a human right and that we all do better when we all do better. And so understanding that we can't just come in and gentrify communities and push people out. We want to be in the business of creating solutions to problems, not just displacing them. And so we want to bring the community into the process of developing the community so that as the infrastructure around them grows and develops, the community and the people are growing and developing as well. And so that's definitely a huge component of my platform. And sorry if I rambled and went on and on about that.
Great.
I mean, I could keep asking you. I mean, can you imagine if those agricultural solutions were cooperatives, worker-owned? So workers not only made a salary, but also built wealth, sharing the wealth and the profit from those. You could see the same thing on the energy co-ops and housing, refurbishing abandoned homes could also be done with worker-owned businesses. So you could really create wealth in these communities for the first time. Really, in generations, if we and that public bank could help to fund those cooperatives like they're doing in New York. They have a cooperative fund to help fund cooperative businesses. So it's incredible. I know you want me to stop, Margaret, but I want to get at least bullet point answers on two more things. Sorry, one is on police. Again, community control is the key. How do you get community control of police? And the second thing is transit. How do we improve a mass transit system that really does not serve, especially East and West Baltimore, very well? Sorry for so many questions.
Oh, no, you're fine. So I guess I'll start with policing. Policing is a huge issue here in Baltimore City. We know we're talking about the anniversary of the uprising and Freddie Gray, and knowing that there have been hundreds of Freddie Grays before that, knowing that right now they're dealing with Keith Davis, knowing that we had Tyrone West, Anthony Anderson, and the list goes on of people who we don't even know their names, because Baltimore City has a history of police brutality. And so we have to, one, have accountability, police accountability, which will help with the restoration of relationships. Our officers cannot expect other community members to hold other community members accountable when they break the law if police officers aren't holding other officers accountable when they break the law. And so there's a tremendous area of accountability that is needed there, and that begins with a culture shift. And so we have to reshape the culture of our police departments, and that begins with recruitment and training of our officers. And that means having the community involved in that process of recruitment and training, and moving towards a true community-based policing model. Not just saying, oh, well, we have foot patrols now. While that's a great step in the right direction, that is a small part of what community-based policing really looks like. The community should be involved in the recruitment and training all the way through, including substantive review should an infraction occur, which we don't have right now. We don't have an effective community review board, and making sure that they are, and that they have teeth and they have the ability to make decisions on the outcomes is something that is tremendous. Also, knowing that we have to bring our police officers and engage them in what's happening in the community, whether it be sports teams with young people, whether it be community cookouts or block parties. They have to begin to get to know the communities of which they're there to serve, because that's what they're there for. They're there to serve, not to occupy. And that all comes back to reshaping the culture of our police department towards true community-based policing. And there's examples of this. The National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives has done this work. The Department of Justice, the COPS program, has done extensive research on what this looks like. And so we can take note. We don't have to reinvent the wheel here. We can see what things have been done. Heck, we can even look across the pond overseas and see great things that their police officers do in de-escalation training versus escalation, and what that looks like to not have a shoot-first mentality, and how can that change the narrative of the interaction of our police in our communities. The second question that was about transit. Baltimore City is someplace that transit has directly impacted perpetuating poverty in the city, because we know that an individual has to have the ability to get to and from work, and we lack a comprehensive transit system that provides the ability to get to and from where jobs are, particularly connecting East and West Baltimore, and so that is something that's huge. I envision a regional solar rail that will be implemented that will create jobs when we're building and constructing it, and then it will connect people, will be interconnected to connect people to the jobs and the industries that we're going to connect here. And that's a big term picture, a long-term picture that I envision the possibility of working with the state to create a solar rail. And
wouldn't it be great if Sparrows Point became the manufacturing center for that kind of, because there's no rail building in the United States. We could do it for the whole country.
Well, yeah, that's something that is absolutely possible, knowing that all of our transit systems and rails that we do in the entire country come from overseas. I believe in most places France they do it. Most of it comes from France. And so what it would look like if we stopped outsourcing jobs and we begin to create here, and we begin to create a space where we can create those jobs, not just for Baltimore City, but we can do it and provide those rail systems for the entire country would be huge. Knowing that Sparrows Point is a place where we had the steel industry and that we already have the space for it. And so now it's just about bringing in the talent to train and training the talent that exists here to begin to do that work for something that we know that we need. Because what makes cities great is a transit system, but we also know that what makes cities green is a transit system, and going to war with cars so that we can remove cars from our usage, or minimize the use of cars, and really begin to move towards clean energy. The less people you have on cars, the more people you have biking, the more people you have using public transit, the more green your city is. And so that's the direction that we really need to move in, and it's definitely something that I have a pretty big vision of happening when I say regional solar rail. I think that it's possible, though. I think that we have the resources, and if you combine it with public banking or something of the sort, we can create the resources and leverage them to do it right here in the city. And again, I think that this all comes back to, again, we're talking about the anniversary of the uprising, knowing that we have to connect these dots of how distribution of capital, access to health or health issues, housing, job creation, transportation, how they're all interconnected, and education, of course, they're all interconnected. And it's very difficult for someone to say, I'm going to come in and focus on education, because they're all interrelated. You can't focus on education unless you understand that those kids have to go home. And until we're addressing the issues that they're dealing with at home, we're not really making even a dent in what needs to be done. And so really connecting all those dots, put together a comprehensive plan of how we move the city forward, and having a vision for what we can create, because it has to be a big vision. It can't be small. You got to think big. And so they said, they told me you have to think big. And so that's what I'm looking to do. And I think that's also one of the things that separates me, is that I'm not thinking small. I'm thinking very big, and I'm also committed to people first. Everything that I'm talking about has a people component first. People, planet, profit. The triple bottom line here is what we're looking at. So,
I just have one.
Margaret, I have to ask you a question. Sorry. So you were running for Senate. So you heard his vision for Baltimore, which is the biggest city in the state. You're running for U.S. Senate in Maryland. How does your vision work with his? How do they interrelate together? Is your platform similar?
My platform is extremely similar when it comes to these issues of, education and housing, nutrition, creating availability of food, clean transit, as well as, some of these kinds of issues we can solve at the municipal level, and some of them take federal involvement. And so that's why, and I think in terms of values, we're very much on the same page in values. And for me, that will apply to what I'm looking at to help the state with, but also what I'm looking at in terms of national policy. And so what kinds of things do we need to do at the national level? For me, healthcare, of course, is one of my priority issues as a physician and someone who's been fighting for a national improved Medicare for all healthcare system for a long time. That's something that I think we have to do at the national level, because that's the only way that we can get past some of the barriers that happen at the state level, as well as making sure that every person in the country, no matter where they go, has access to a single standard of high quality healthcare. It also, in terms of my being in the Senate, looking at the types of international agreements that we sign and the impact that those have. I mean, here in Baltimore, we saw the closing of our steel industry after the North American Free Trade Agreement was signed, and now we have 3 huge agreements that are being negotiated that would further privatize and even our public services, water, waste, education, transportation, permanently privatize those, and really serve as the complete opposite, an impediment to the democracy that we're seeking, an impediment to the people power that we're seeking. It would give corporations greater power to determine the laws and how our city is run. So I'm excited about having you, here in the municipal level, and if we win at the federal level as well. There are lots of ways that we can partner together to create this vision in Baltimore, throughout Maryland, and push these policies at a national level as well. And now I get to ask my question.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were just wrap it up.
Well, this is a wrap-up question. 1 anniversary after the uprising in Baltimore. How are you feeling?
I'd have to say that I feel hopeful. I think that, again, I said that more people are paying attention than ever before. I also think that more people are organizing and getting people together collectively to say that we have to do this together. You're doing great things here. I'm doing great things here. Let's connect these dots and see how we can move forward together and provide resources and help each other to understand the process. And so, I'm hopeful. I'm extremely hopeful, and I'm excited for what the future has, because I don't think that this is over. I think that people are really moving forward with an agenda of creating real change to break the barriers or the conditions that were put in place to cause the uprising last year. And so that excites me, and it has me hopeful.
And that's a positive way to end our show. Yeah, why don't you give your website so people can support your campaign?
My website is harrisforbaltimore.com. You can find me on Facebook, Harris for Baltimore, Twitter, Harris for Be More, Instagram, Harris for Be More. It all comes right to me.
Great, thank you. So that's it for Clearing the Fog. We want to thank Kimon Freeman and for all the effort that it took to create our first special live broadcast remotely from Baltimore City. So thank you, Kimon Freeman, co-founder of We Act Radio. We'll go out with the song by Junkyard Empire called We Want Because
The people organized.
Can Build the Kind of Future
We
We
Want.
Want.
That's how it goes, right?
It says we got the love, uplift our brother, and